Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video, we're going to make a slight detour and continue down the path of radio buttons. I think this is an important idea because it was a difficult subject for me, so I want to make sure to explain it so if it's an issue for you, it won't be. Okay? So let's go through this. So this is the same web application we did before, but I made some more radio buttons. 2 is easy. What if we had 10? Okay, so input, I just put number 1 in front. Input type equals radio, name equals radio, all the same. Values are all different. So you notice that? And what does this actually look like? This is what it looks like. So notice, by the way, let's refresh it. Nothing is checked by default. We could check something if we wanted to, but I'm not going to right now. Only one button can be clicked at a time. Whoops. There we go. And then we hit submit. Okay, so what are we going to actually do? What I want to do is basically click something, whatever I have clicked, hit submit, it will be displayed down here. Okay, so let's go back here. I'm just gonna comment this out for the future. So control /. We're just gonna comment this out for right now. And we're gonna come down here and we're just gonna instead send the function to radio, go after the radio function. Okay, right down here, I'll make a function radio. And what I have to do is, again, display this. So what I could do is radio, but it's a capital, radio button input element, radio equals querySelector, name equals radio, right? I'm doing something wrong here. Okay. I could always do this and then say querySelector dot text equals radio. Dot value. That's basically what we did before, right? So let's try this. 3, 7. Again, when you hit the submit button, you're not instantiating it until you hit the submit button. So this thing has already been clicked and it accesses that information through there. That's one way to do it. What are the other ways to do it? Well, this is the confusing thing. Let's look at the select option. Okay, select box. I could just, if this could be 50 lines long, and I choose it, and that's the value of the input element, of the ID of the element height unit, right? So why can't I just with radio just say just whatever is checked and just say the ID of that and the value of that? Why is it different? Well, if you look at the select, this entire select element is the object. Okay, the options are not, well, they're objects, but they're not the object. It's like these are like the tires on a car, but this is the car. When you look at a radio input element, each individual element, radio input element, is going to be the object itself. So you see the difference. This is not a tire on a bigger car. This is basically the car itself. The fact that they have the same name, it's like having the same Toyota car. We have 10 different cars, but they are different, separate objects and elements by themselves, as opposed to a select element. One select element with many options. We have distinct radio buttons themselves. Okay. So what does that mean? What that basically means is if you access the name, you basically have to just loop through all of them and see which one is actually checked. How do we do that? So we mentioned before an ID, each element, if you choose to designate it, has a specific ID. Each element in the entire page, the ID has to be unique. Really should be unique. You don't have to do it, but really make sure. Just do it that way, okay? Things get very confusing otherwise. How do you access all of the elements with name radio? Well, if you think about it, you have to access not an object, but a list of objects, right? That's where the value of, comment that out, querySelectorAll. So I'm going to say radio input element, radio equals querySelectorAll. Whenever you use querySelector, you return one instance of an object. querySelectorAll means you return or you create a list of objects. And so because it's name, it would be name equals radio and that will actually return a list. Okay, is that syntax correct? No. No, that's correct. Element list cannot be assigned. Oh, that is a list actually. querySelector radio value dot toString. Because it has to be a string, right? The getter value is not defined for the class list. That is correct. Let's see what that actually returns. So it actually returns a list of all of these. Now, if we have a list, what can we do? We can actually search each individual element or each individual object within the list. Okay, so querySelectorAll doesn't imply, it means you are going to return a list. querySelector means you're going to return one object. And what are the contents of these? Well, this would be a radio input element for all of these are radio input elements. Okay, so how do we do that? We basically have to loop through all of these and find out the one that is actually checked. So how do we do that? Well, it's a loop, right? For int I equals 0, I is less than radio.length. Hope this looks familiar. I plus plus, right? If radio I dot checked, if it is checked, print, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to do that, put that here instead. Dot text radio dot I. Okay, so what's going to say is I'm going to loop through all of these values right inside here. The one that becomes checked, then I'm going to go ahead and put the value there. I'm getting an error. 47 if radio dot checked expected find if radio dot what did I just do here? So that one goes here, that one goes to here. Is that correct? Element cannot be assigned 48 of 39. Dot value. Okay, that should work. Okay, so for int, go through the loop. If there's a big, huge, massive loop, of course, you can always put break at the end here. Why? Well, because if there's a list of 10,000 values, it's going to keep going through, even though it checked the third one, right? You shouldn't have 10,000 radio buttons, but I'm just saying, okay, you don't have to have this. It's not going to be a big deal in the vast majority of cases. So querySelector, just display it, but here you go through the entire list. Let's, like I said before, cross our fingers a little. 2, 9, 7. So that's the way to actually find it out, okay? There's one other method to do that. So that's one method. Loop through through the list, because the list has multiple elements with the name radio. That's one thing. Number 2 is, that's a for loop. I get these curly brackets messed up from time to time. So the other option is radio, the method forEach. forEach. forEach will go through each single element. So for each element E in the list, if E dot checked print E dot value. Let's see if that works. That is not working. Okay, radio for each E. Not getting any errors here other than it's not. Oh, wait a minute. Did I save this? Oh, wait a minute. If I'm doing print, it's going to be on the, I don't know what I was thinking. Tools, JavaScript console. It'll be right here. Okay, so sorry. 7, 3, 4. That'll actually work. So what we're actually doing is we're getting this. For each is just the method to loop through the list. And that's what we can actually do. So it goes through each element and checks, does whatever you want it to do. So that's how you handle these radio buttons. Again, if you don't know, wait a minute, what is this E? You can always, what's the runtime type? Remember, I do this not infrequently. Ah, it's an input element. That's right. So that should be radio input button element, E. So that's what we'll actually do, okay? Remember, one last time, querySelector, when you have a list, you can, if you had like all of these the same ID, you can querySelectorAll the ID. So you can do that. Don't do that, but I'm just saying the concept of it is you can. Anytime you have a bunch of, we'll go over this more in the future, a bunch of elements with the same name or the same even class or the same something, you can basically get a list of them, return them, same tag name. So if you get the same tag name, querySelectorAll to get all of them. If you don't do querySelectorAll, you'll only get one value. Okay? So I think that was the main part I wanted talk about radio buttons because it can be a little confusing if you don't understand the underlying principle about how each one is a individual object, individual element, and not an entire element like the select element. Okay, thank you.